Road to the White House Rewind continues with more from the 1976 campaign with the Gerald Ford campaign rally in Tennessee. President Ford went on to win the Tennessee Republican primary over former California Governor Ronald Reagan by less than 1% of the vote. The race remained tight through the end of the primaries until it was decided at the GOP convention in July, when President Ford secured the nomination by a slim margin on the first roll call. He went on to lose the general election and the presidency to Democrat Jimmy Carter. This 20-minute event is courtesy of the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Library and Museum.
Thank you very, very much, Congressman Jimmy Quillen, Senator Howard Baker, Governor Winfield Dunn, Ed Williams, Reverend Johnson, fellow Americans. At the outset, let me congratulate and thank the East Tennessee State University Marching Band and the other fine bands and wonderful organizations here. I'm deeply grateful for your attendance and the wonderful music. I am likewise most grateful that Governor Winfield Dunn is here. He was an outstanding governor for you in the state of Tennessee for 4 years. He was one of the most outstanding governors in the whole United States during the period that he served you in Tennessee, and it was my privilege and my honor as the minority leader in the House of Representatives to work with him on many, many projects involving your state and involving governors throughout the country, and I thank you very, very much. I am deeply grateful to my very good and very old friend, Howard Baker, for his endorsement. You have in Howard one of the outstanding members of the United States Senate. Nobody in the Congress knows more than Howard involving the problems of energy, nuclear power, and he was tall and strong in the difficult days in 1972 and 73, and again in 1975 and 76, involving the problems of the intelligence community. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart, Howard, for your endorsement and your support. Obviously, it's a great honor and privilege for me to be in Johnson City again. I was here in 1972, had a delightful and wonderful opportunity to meet many of you from Johnson City. I deeply appreciate Jimmy Quillen's generous and very, very strong support. I've worked with him in the Congress when I was the minority leader all the time that we served concurrently. We're close personal friends, and he and I have worked together for 4 years for the medical school project of this community. With this great crowd, it's just great to be in Johnson City, home of the Tennessee Buccaneers. The Science Hill Hilltoppers. The Constitution Hall Bandits. And the Independence Hall Rebels. My message today to the people of Tennessee can be summed up in just a very few words. As much as I believe in a strong and prosperous American automobile industry, I'm here to say this year there's absolutely no reason whatsoever to trade in your Ford on another model. I've had the great honor and privilege to serve as your president now for more than 21 months. When I took office in August of 1974, America was faced with some of the most pressing and the most serious problems in its 200-year history. Our economy had gone haywire, with prices going up at an annual rate of more than 12%, and with America on the brink of the worst recession in 40 years. Our national resolve to meet international commitments had been called into question by our allies and adversaries alike. There was great danger to peace in many, many areas throughout the world. Underlying these serious problems was a crisis of confidence in our government, especially in the White House. There was a crisis of spirit among the American people, many of whom began to question whether our best days were already behind us. 21 months later, the American scene has dramatically improved. That 12% inflation rate has been cut more than half. In fact, it's down to less than 3% in the first 3 months of 1976, and that's a 75% reduction, a good record. After seeing unemployment rise to nearly 9% just 12 months ago, at the low point of that recession, we have recovered more than 3,300,000 jobs in the last 12 months alone. 87,400,000 are on the job today throughout the 50 states, and that is more than ever before in the history of the United States. And I'd say that's a pretty good comeback from where we were a year ago. Internationally, America is at peace with every nation on earth. Not one American is serving in combat anywhere today, any place throughout the world, and I intend to keep it that way. The day that I took the oath of office as President of the United States, I said that truth is the glue that holds government together. 21 months later, the record of my administration is one of candor, integrity, and openness. It's a record that has restored the people's confidence and trust in the White House, and it's a record that I'm very, very proud of. The American people today are looking into the future with faith instead of fear. And that future can be as bright and as successful as we want to make it. Economically, we're on a course of steady growth and rising prosperity. We have done battle with the worst recession in 40 years and with the worst inflation in more than 50 years, and we've won. Our next battle is with deficit spending by the federal government. And I have already begun that battle with 49 vetoes as my ammunition. Despite a supposedly veto-proof two-thirds Democratic majority in the Congress, we got 42 of those vetoes sustained. And those 42 vetoes will save the American people $13 billion. And if the Congress keeps sending me budget-busting bills down to the Oval Office in the White House, I will use my veto again and again and again. I will not be satisfied until we balance the federal budget, and the sooner the better. My plan is to combine spending cuts with tax cuts and to reduce the growth of government across the board. We cut your taxes last year, and that led to a major increase in consumer spending, and that increase was a very major factor in our economic recovery. Last January, I asked the Congress for another tax cut of $10 billion starting July 1st of this year. But instead, it looks like the majority in the Congress wants to spend $17 billion more than I proposed, eliminating the tax cut and increasing the national debt to $713 billion. That's the wrong program, and we've got to fight for my program. And may I mention, among the tax cuts that I recommended to the Congress was an increase in the personal exemption from $750 to $1,000, and I can't understand why the Congress or a majority of them don't understand that the people in the middle income area need that tax cut. With the new budget that I proposed, we could cut the rate of growth in federal spending by 50%, and we can achieve a balanced budget by 1979. Now, if we can get a few more Howard Bakers, Bill Brocks, Jimmy Quillens, John Duncans, Robin Beards in the Congress of the United States, we can cut government spending, we can balance the budget, and we can win the battle, and I hope you'll help us across the board. The sound of real battle is only faintly heard in the world today after so many years of war. The United States can be proud of the role it has played in bringing peace to the world and in promoting the cause of freedom, of human dignity throughout this globe. We can play that role successfully because we are strong enough to command the confidence of our allies and the respect of our adversaries. After years and years of lower and lower defense budgets imposed by the Congress, we have reversed that dangerous trend. I have proposed in the last 2 years, January of 1975, January of 1976, the two largest defense budgets in American history. And I hope that we finally convince a majority in the Congress that it can't shortchange our national defense any longer, and we're going to win that battle against that Congress like we're winning the battle in the economy and for peace throughout the world. The purpose of America's mighty arsenal is not to terrify the weak, to provoke armed confrontation, or to lay claim to that which is not ours. Our purpose is to defend freedom and to maintain a foundation of strength on which to build a better and a safer world. But our strength does not rest in our military power alone. Our major source of strength is the productivity and the success of the American farmer, who in the last 3 years has enjoyed his highest net income in our nation's history and whose exports have hit high records. Those exports have helped to put America back on the road to prosperity, and the farmer deserves the thanks of every American in every one of our states. That just doesn't mean the big farm operator. It means a small family farmer right here in East Tennessee, and I thank you all. To preserve that family farm and other family enterprises, I have proposed to the Congress raising the estate tax exemption from $60,000 to $150,000. In addition, I have proposed stretching out those payments over a 25-year period at low interest rates, and most importantly, exempting from taxation the transfer of property between husband and wife. I want to see the family enterprises stay in the family rather than be sacrificed to pay the federal tax collector. The family tradition, like the American tradition, is one of security, one of rich heritage, of pride and hope for the future. There have now been 8 generations of independent Americans, each one working, planning, and praying that life would be even better for the next generation than for theirs. In a very special sense, I want to continue as president because I want this generation of Americans to leave a better America to the next generation. I want to ensure that realistic, responsible policies are right for America, that have been proven right over the last 21 months, and to make sure that they continue. I want to maintain that peace that we now enjoy, to secure that peace through strength, and to make certain that the legacy of peace continues for our children as well as our grandchildren. I want to continue the policies of reliance on the private economy, of cutting taxes and bureaucracies, and removing useless regulations and wasteful spending. These policies have brought us back from the depths of a recession to a sustained recovery, and they can help to ensure that runaway inflation never again robs us or our loved ones of the rewards of honest work and lifetime savings. Finally, I want to finish the most important job that I've begun: the restoration of faith and trust in the presidency itself. The great institutions of government, crafted with such great care by our founding fathers, have their foundations in the people's trust. In the past 21 months, the foundation has been strengthened rather than shaken, and we will strengthen it more in the next 4 years. I did not seek this presidency, but I will not shirk from its responsibilities. Telling the truth is the secret to success in government, as in everything else. In my administration, we have faced many of the unpleasant facts of American life, and we have dealt with them in a forthright and effective way. We have avoided making fancy promises and raising false hopes. And in the future, as in the past, I will promise no more than I can deliver, and deliver everything that I promise. Peace, prosperity, and trust are the sum of my performance in the nearly 2 years since I became your president. They are a prescription for progress in America today, and they can be the greatest legacy any generation of Americans has ever left to its children. And that is why I ask for your support on May 25th, November 2nd, and the 4 challenging years ahead. Thank you very, very much.
Each week leading up to the 2016 election, Road to the White House Rewind brings you archival coverage of presidential races. Coming up, a film called Jimmy Who, created for the 1976 campaign of Democrat Jimmy Carter. The film was originally used to introduce the former Georgia governor to voters during the primary season, but was updated as the race progressed. This version chronicles the campaign through his nomination at the Democratic National Convention in July. Jimmy Carter went on to defeat Republican incumbent Gerald Ford in a close general election, with Carter capturing 297 electoral votes to Ford's 240. This 15-minute film is courtesy of the Jimmy Carter Presidential Library and Museum.
In December of 1974, there was a major headline on the editorial page of the Atlanta Constitution that said Jimmy Carter is running for what? And the what was about this today. I'm running for president.
Jimmy Carter entered the Democratic presidential race a political unknown. Outside of Georgia, hardly anyone even recognized his name. But that would change.
Jimmy who?
Jimmy Carter.
Jimmy who?
I don't know who he is.
Jimmy Carter's baseball player, isn't he?
Well, I got nothing against him. Looks to me he's all right. You know what I mean? He's a Democrat, right?
He's a people's man. He's sexy.
Wait a minute now.
What do you mean by that?
I've never thought of Jimmy Carter as sexy. I think that if it comes down to it, people would say more that Gerald Ford is sexy because he was a football player. Carter sexy? I just think he's a very neat man.
Yeah, I think he has a nice smile. How do you do?
What his bushy hair flying all around?
I heard he was a peanut farmer. I don't think it makes any difference, you know, I mean, whether he's a peanut farmer or not. I mean, there's nothing wrong with peanuts as far as I'm concerned, you know.
I picture him like one of us. One of the working people, one of the common people.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me a great deal of pleasure to present to you the next President of the United States, Jimmy Carter.
Sometimes introductions are hard to follow. I remember about 5 years ago when I was running for governor, and the young man who introduced me had done a great deal of work on my background, and he got up and said, we have with us tonight, at that time, Senator Jimmy Carter from Plains, Georgia. He went to Georgia Southwestern College where he studied chemistry, and then he said he went to Georgia Tech where he studied engineering, and then he pointed out that I had gone to the U.S. Naval Academy and received a degree in naval science. And then he said he went to Union College in Schenectady, New York, where he did his graduate work in nuclear physics. And now he said he grows peanuts for a living.
Jimmy Carter's roots go deep into the dark red soil of southwest Georgia. He was born near the small farming town of Plains, but like many young people, decided against continuing the family tradition. Eventually, he ended a promising career as a naval officer to return to the land, resuming the work of his parents and their parents before them.
My children will be the sixth generation on the same land. And although I've had a good chance to get an education as an engineer and a scientist, nobody in my family before my generation ever had a chance to finish high school. We've always worked for a living. We know what it means to work.
The determination, the self-discipline, the pure exertion that helped Jimmy Carter build a successful farming business would also see him through a punishing campaign, a campaign that was marked in the beginning by loneliness. There were no reporters, no cameras, no Secret Service nearby when Jimmy first walked up and introduced himself to countless voters. This style was unheard of for a presidential hopeful, but for Jimmy Carter, there was no other way.
I want to be tested in the most severe possible way. I can't think of any more severe way than campaigning 250 days this year outside of Georgia, or entering 31 different primaries. I want the people of this country to know my character, my strengths and my weaknesses, my stand on the issues. If I can measure up to what the American people want our government to be, I'll be elected.
Jimmy Carter from Georgia. I hope to be your next president.
And so he traveled to the towns, the cities, to the meeting halls and factories, the supermarkets and sidewalks, talking to as many people as he could meet in as many states as he could visit. Gradually, he began to close the gap between Jimmy Carter unknown and Jimmy Carter, a candidate to be considered. New Hampshire, the first primary, the first state in which voters would make their choice. Traditionally, no candidate who lost in New Hampshire ever won the presidency. In the final days, a group of Georgia supporters, often referred to as Carter's Peanut Brigade, flew into New Hampshire.
Hello, are you Mrs. Carl? Yes. I'm Doc Paget, and I'm a volunteer from the state of Georgia.
If we had snow on the ground like this, we'd be paralyzed for a week. We couldn't get out of the house.
Her schedule was grueling, almost as tough as her husband's. Yet through it all, Rosalind remained an earnest and gracious campaigner.
People ask me every day, how can you stand for your husband to be in politics and everybody know everything you do? And I just tell them that we were born and raised and still live in Plains, Georgia. It has a population of 683, and everybody has always known everything I did. And Jimmy has never had any hint of scandal in his personal or his public life. I really believe he can restore that honesty, integrity, openness, confidence in government that we so sorely need in our country today. I think he'll be a great president.
The last vote was cast and the polls were closed. As darkness fell over New England, candidates met once again with their supporters and anxiously waited for the first returns of the primary season.
Jimmy Carter took a long lead tonight in the race for the Democratic presidential nomination. He won the New Hampshire primary handily. CBS News.
When the official results were announced, Jimmy Carter had won 30% of the total popular vote.
The New Hampshire results show that in New England, being from the South was not the handicap that many people thought it would be.
Thank you very much for coming by.
I've enjoyed it. Raise your hand.
Other victory celebrations would follow, but few would be as gratifying to the dark horse candidate from Georgia.
I remember when we couldn't find a microphone.
The primaries came in rapid succession, like firecrackers on the 4th of July.
This year we've had 30 state primaries, more than ever before, making it possible to take our campaign directly to the people of America, to homes and shopping centers, to factory shift lines and colleges, to beauty parlors and barber shops, to farmers markets and union halls. This has been a long and a personal campaign, a kind of humbling experience, reminding us that ultimate political influence rests not with the power brokers, but with the people.
the people listened to the simple way Jimmy Carter voiced the high ideals of the Democratic Party. They showed their approval with feverish excitement, a far cry from the polite and solitary handshakes of months before. And the smile that greeted those early voters, it had become as familiar as the morning paper. It's a long way from Plains, Georgia to Washington, D.C. The strength of a person can be measured by the path he takes to travel there. For Jimmy Carter, that road was one of hard work and determination. It's the same road that has been traveled for more than 200 years in this country by people who could see in hardships freedom and in obstacles opportunity. Those men and women literally built this nation from the land, nurturing a dream with dedication and the sweat of their brow. The seasons have turned into centuries now, but the traditions they planted will continue to grow.
We can all see a greater nation. I have a vision of America, a vision that has grown and ripened as I've traveled and talked and listened and learned and gotten to know the people of this country. I see an America poised not only at the beginning of a new century, but at the brink of a long new era of more effective and efficient and sensitive and competent government. I see an America that has turned away from scandals and corruption. I see an American president who governs with vigor and with vision and affirmative leadership. A president who is not isolated from our people, but a president who feels your pain and who shares your dreams. I see an America on the move again, united, its wounds healed, an America entering its third century with confidence and competence and compassion, an America that lives up to the majesty of its Constitution and the simple decency of its people. This is my vision of America. I hope you share it, and I hope you will help me fight for it.
I heard a young man speaking out just the other day, so I stopped to take a listen to what he had to say. He spoke straight and simple, by that I was impressed. He said, once and for all, why not the best? He said his name was Jimmy Carter, and he was running for president. Then he laid out a plan of action that made a lot of sense. He talked about the government and how good it could be for you and me. Oh, that's the way it ought to be right now. Once and for all, why
I want to see us once again have a nation that's as good and honest and decent and truthful and competent and compassionate and is filled with love as all the American people.
He spoke straight and simple, and I began to understand. Oh, I was listening to quite a man talking to me, and I began to see we need Jimmy Carter. Why settle for less, America? Once and for all, why not the best? We need Jimmy Carter. We can't afford to settle for less, America. Once and for all, why not the best?
Madam Secretary, we proudly give 72 of our delegate votes to the next President of the United States.
Monday on The Communicators. While visiting a technology fair on Capitol Hill, we spoke with Republican Congressman Fred Upton from Michigan, chair of the Energy and Commerce Committee, and Bill Schuster from Pennsylvania, chair of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. We also interviewed innovators from Ford Motor Company, executives Gary Jablonski and Andrew Wolfling, about new technology, spectrum issues, and the upcoming spectrum auction.
Look where we are today in terms of communication, with job creation. We're working on a major bill, or we're working on legislation that we've already passed, but we're going to see the FCC free up more spectrum, which can enable these devices to be built, to be used, to communicate. We're on the run.
But putting in the legislation, encouraging those states to start to take the look at how do you build a road in the future? What are these autonomous vehicles? Dealing with the companies that are here today, what do you need for your technology to work even better?
From the very first generation of Sync that we launched almost a decade ago, our focus has been on making your device as useful as possible in the car in a way that lets you keep your hands on the wheel and your eyes on the road. And for us, that's always been about voice technology.
Ford understands that there is great demand for more spectrum for unlicensed use. So we are working with our colleagues to come up with a sharing solution in the 5.9 band. We're working with our colleagues at NTIA, we're working with our colleagues at the Department of Transportation, and most importantly, the Federal Communications Commission.
Watch The Communicators Monday night at 8 Eastern on C-SPAN 2.
Coming up next on American History TV, a panel discussion with university and nonprofit presidents who are historians by training. They talk about their transitions to leadership positions and how their history backgrounds helped them in their roles as executives. This panel was part of the 2016 Organization of American Historians annual meeting held this year in Providence, Rhode Island. It's about an hour and 15 minutes.
Thank you for coming. My name is John Butler. I'm the president of the Organization of American Historians. And we are here today to discuss historians as presidents. This seemed very appropriate, in good part because the conference is on leadership, which I am aware, perfectly aware, is a kind of corny term, okay? But we live in a society that is in need of that quality. And many historians serve as officers in their universities, as officers in their colleges, as officers in their departments. And when we were all in graduate school, no one ever said anything about that subject. None of us were trained to be department chairs. None of us were trained to be provosts. None of us were trained to be deans. And none of us were trained to be historians. To be president. Oh, dear. You can see that I'm not doing so well. Okay. Or maybe I'm doing better than I thought. So we thought this would be an interesting panel that you would like because we have a number of distinguished presidents who are historians, and most of us actually, it's slightly a little awkward because most of us are greeting each other because we know each other as historians. We've seen Drew and Earl and Ed on panels giving papers. We've read their books. And here they are as former presidents of a university, a president of a university, a president of one of the major foundations in the United States. And we don't often think about that. And the question is, to what extent did their role as historians help them in their positions, or does it help them in their positions? And we also would really like to invite a conversation about higher education. We all know perfectly well that these are not easy times for higher education. These are difficult times for higher education in terms of budgets, especially in state institutions, but also in terms of our culture. When Bill O'Reilly says and introduces a faculty member on one of his panels, he's inclined to say, "Professor," and that's not a compliment. Okay? So the question is, how do we compromise? How do we comprehend the role of history and higher education? And I think we have three individuals here who can help us. We regret that one of our panel members, President Ricardo Romo, who is the president of the University of Texas at San Antonio, through a whole series of completely bizarre schedule changes by airlines, is not able to be here this afternoon. And so I very much regret that. We have three excellent panelists, and I want to introduce them in alphabetical order. And I will say one thing, and that is it's of no interest to anyone outside, except that there's no light up here for my notes. So I have to hold them up like this so I can see them. Ed Ayers received his BA at the University of Tennessee and his PhD at Yale. He's known among ourselves as historians for a number of books, The Promise of the New South, In the Presence of Mine Enemies, and for a fabulous digital project called The Valley of the Shadow, Two Communities in the American Civil War. He was the 9th president of the University of Richmond from 2007 to 2015, and he will be the president of the Organization of American Historians in 2017 and 2018. Drew Gilpin-Faust earned her BA at Bryn Mawr, her PhD at the University of Pennsylvania. She's known for her historical works, The Mothers of Invention, Women in the Slaveholding South in the American Civil War, A Sacred Circle, The Social Role of the Intellectual in the Old South, 1840 to 1860, and her most recent book, which attracted enormous attention, both for the substance of its scholarship, the emotional impact that the book presents, and yes, let's face it, because she happens to be the president of Harvard University, A Republic of Suffering, Death in the American Civil War. She is the 28th president and the first woman to be president of Harvard University, and she began her presidency in 2007. Earl Lewis received his BA from Concordia College in Moorhead, Minnesota, his PhD from the University of Minnesota. He's the author of a wonderful book called In Their Own Interests, Race, Class, and Power in 20th Century Norfolk, as well as a book that he co-authored with Heidi Ardizone called Love on Trial, An American Scandal in Black and White, and also which he's done with Joe William Trotter and Tara Hunter, the African American Urban Experience. He is the 6th president of the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, which he began in 2013, and we are honored, as we are with Ed, that he will be the president of the Organization of American Historians in 2018 and 2019. And Ed is going to manage the discussion, and I'm going to sit in the audience. So thank you very much for coming, and and Ed will now take this over. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Tom. Thank you. So it is a little bit strange. It's good to see everybody, that I'm both the moderator and will be answering the questions a little bit closer than this. That would be fine. Thank you. I appreciate the audience participation on that to let me know. But first, I'd like to torture my colleagues and friends with hard questions, and then maybe you'll forget what the question was, and I'll be able to get out of it. So I want to ask the question that I think most people in the room would be thinking: what the heck were you thinking of to give up a very nice job as a professor, writing these books, teaching, a leader in your profession, and to trade all that for all of the relentless hassles of being a university president, or of the burdens of giving away all that money? Both those things. So I don't know which of you would like, since it begins with what the heck were you thinking about, it seems harder for a president of Harvard to answer than somebody giving away money. I'll start with Drew.
Thanks, Ed. My story is really one of a slippery slope, shall I say, because I never intended to take on an administrative role, and through my many years of teaching at Penn, I resisted them as actively as I could. And when in 1999, Neil Rudenstein, president of Harvard, came and said, would I consider being the dean of the newly established Radcliffe Institute, it struck me as something that maybe I'd think about. And he was very persuasive over a number of months. But what was appealing to me about that was it seemed as if I could pursue a scholarly career and continue with that, but help launch this very important new aspect of Harvard that I thought would establish women at Harvard in a very different way from what had been the previous arrangements, and I thought that was an important thing to do. So I went under something of an illusion, and part of what made me do it was I felt that increasingly I was being asked, as I became more senior in the profession, to do administrative tasks of one sort or another, which somehow didn't count, and for which I had no kind of administrative support or anybody to do Xeroxing or anything. So I thought, all right, I'll make this my day job, and we'll see how that goes, and I'll still be able to have my scholarly life. Well, I had less of a scholarly life than I expected when I got to Radcliffe, but I did find it absolutely fascinating to be working in a team with other people. It's a much more shared experience to be an administrator, and to be able to push agendas in a way that advanced important goals for other people's scholarship and other people's careers. And so I really enjoyed it, and I got kind of ensnared in the whole challenge of what's happening to American higher education. And then through a series of completely unexpected developments, I ended up taking on a much larger administrative task and becoming the president of Harvard. But it also was a situation that enabled me to engage with issues in higher education in a really robust way, and that's been very rewarding.
So if I were grading your answer, I'd say it was great until you left out the part where you became president of Harvard. Through a series, so maybe talk a little bit more about, why you would, so it's like you still had a very good job at Radcliffe, but so what is the presidency sort of just an expansion and amplification of that work, or did you see a different sense of mission?
It was a different sense of mission. It was one in which I felt that decisions I could make, policies I could embrace, questions I could engage, would be ones that would really matter for an institution that I felt really mattered. And as Dean of the Radcliffe Institute, I'd been part of the university's Council of Deans, so I'd been in a kind of front row seat for a lot of the big questions of higher education that Harvard confronted. And I was very interested in them. And so I felt I understood a lot about what the university needed and what I might be able to contribute. So that was an important
So
part
you
of
didn't really
it.
have to deliberate very much when the opportunity came your way. You could see this is something that would be exciting that you would like to take. Great. Earl, what was your path?
I said answer yes to let's see if we can get this right. Answer yes to a question in 1990 that changed my life. I had moved from Berkeley to Michigan because I didn't want to do administration. And in 1990, I was asked to be the director of the Center for African American and African Studies at the University of Michigan, only a few months after having moved. And I said yes. And along the way, within the first 6 months, I discovered something about myself. That so much about academic life was about deferred gratification. And that in this role, I actually could help build an institution and see it move forward. And I could do it immediately. And in fact, I said once to a friend, it's funny to walk into your office in the morning and realize that by the time you leave in the afternoon, you actually could have gotten something done that changed the course of for a number of other people. And that led then from a path from a director to then dean at the University of Michigan for almost 9 years, and then provost at Emory for another 8.5 years. And so by the time the job came to thinking about being president of a philanthropy, and I should note I actually was on the board of trustees of the Mellon Foundation, so it was an institution I had a little inside knowledge of, and it seemed the right move at that particular moment. But a lot of it goes back to, and I think the way John framed the question, I actually had mentors as I was going through graduate school where we actually never talked about assuming leadership roles, but I got to watch them. And so Russ Menard, who was one of my advisors in graduate school, Russ had a whole series of administrative jobs, and when he and I would find a moment just to sit and chat, I just listened to him. And I realized that I may not want to do it, and I certainly didn't think I wanted to do it between 84 and 89, but by the time I got to Michigan, I was able to actually see that it was consequential. And as I look in the audience and I see a few people who worked with me and during that time at the University of Michigan. And what we were able to do then was also to build a program, but a program that allowed a number of the graduate students with whom I worked to actually begin to understand something about institution building. And that is easy to sometimes complain about the place that you call home. It's much harder sometimes to try to figure out how to change it. And that requires some attention to then structures and the interaction between structure and culture and how individuals then actually place themselves in those structures and cultures to actually affect change.
So, like Drew, you were in a front row seat to see a presidency of a university, and now you're presidency of a foundation. How would you compare the two?
Well, I was, at the time that I was offered and accepted the presidency of the Mellon Foundation, I also was contemplating the presidency of a university. And I remember I called a dear friend of mine. We had grown up together, and this friend had headed HR operations at Coca-Cola and a couple of other major corporations. And so I called her. I said, look, I have this set of options before me, and we've known each other since the 5th grade. And she started laughing. I said, why are you laughing? She says, let me get it right. You get to beg for money or give it away. And I say, it's not quite that easy. She says, let me say it again. You get to beg for money, you'll give it away. And so at that moment, recognizing that, as one friend said to me, being a provost is like being a shock absorber for an institution. And we're going through the recession and come out on the other side. But Emory was and still remains the #1 and #2 employer in metropolitan Atlanta. And so understanding that the decisions you make actually have consequences not only for those individuals, but the actual economic health of a whole region. And I kept thinking, is there another way to begin to be able to affect the kinds of opportunities that have always been important to me? And I realized that the Mellon Foundation is unique in the sense that about 70% of our dollars go to support higher education in a way. So it's not walking away from higher education, it's actually figuring out a new way to partner and help to shape some of the opportunity structures for American higher education.
And this is where I answered the question I asked myself, well, Ed, how did you... Well, it's a fascinating story. Not so much, really. I was a professor at the University of Virginia for 20 years and went up the various ranks and, did various things. I was chair of the faculty senate, but I never even been department chair. They asked me if I would like to be dean of the College and Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, which is about 70% of UVA. And I thought, boy, being department chair looks hard. This looks better. You get an office and do that. But it was, like you, it was a place I cared about a lot. And it felt to me when I became Dean of Arts and Sciences that I was just chairing the largest committee. That's how I saw it. I was just trying to, hey, kumbaya, let's all work together, let's make good things happen. And I did that with every expectation of doing it and then quitting and getting back into full-time history business. And just as I was finishing what I set out to do, raising all money for a big building, other things, and I was supposed to go to Oxford the next year, the University of Richmond called and said, we'd like for you to be president. And, so I've been in an R1, and to go to a place that's fundamentally an undergraduate institution seems to use my favorite academic word, counterintuitive. But I looked at it and I thought, boy, to be able to have this sense of efficacy, of being able to actually shape an entire institution. The University of Richmond's fortunate in having a large endowment, but had not yet shown that it could really be a diverse and inclusive place in all dimensions. And I thought, for somebody who spent most of his waking hours in the 19th century American South worrying about slavery and civil war and segregation and injustice, to be able to go to the former capital of the Confederacy and have this institution that's poised to do great things and just see what you could do with it, suddenly the pieces came together. So I love the University of Virginia. I was there for 27 years, but then decided suddenly when there was this constellation of opportunities to do this. In full disclosure, I should say that Drew kindly accepted the invitation to introduce me at my inauguration and sort of wove some of these themes together then as well. So I did that for 8 years, and it was intense and fun and great. But my goal from the very beginning was to come back out the other side and when I had enough energy to write books and talk and teach. And so I've always done it with sort of one foot sort of touching the brake. That's not really true. I'm all in, but knowing that I wanted to drive as fast as I could to get to the other part of it. So I think what we always have in common is curiosity. To actually see how an institution runs is so interesting when you see it. All those years when I was dean, people would come up to me and say, at a conference like this, Ed, how are you doing? I said, I'm fine. I said, no, really, you're the dean. You can't be doing well. I said, no, it's fun. And they go, no, it's not. They talked to me like I had a terminal illness or something. And, and everybody makes the joke about going over to the dark side and all this sort of stuff. Because from the position of a faculty member, to get up every day and solve problems that somebody else's causes does look like the idea of hell. But when you kind of get into it and realize that, hey, solving a problem that somebody else causes is actually a contribution to the institution, and it's fun. So I'm done not because I didn't like it, just because there's still stuff I really want to do. So I believe in the program, it was billed that we would, and in fact John just said, that we would reflect a little bit on how it could be that being trained as a historian equipped us in any way whatsoever